Good evening, members, and welcome to the latest edition, as I always say, to Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee meeting. And I note it's Halloween, so there's a few faces around the room I don't recognise. That went down like a lead balloon. I also want to just quickly point out there's some walking wounded this evening, so we're all not feeling too good. But we'll press on. Before we start on the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated to enable ESI to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings hopefully will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? Councillor Butler is entering the chamber. I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place. Thank you, members. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies received from Councillor Blackburn, Simon Ells and Councillor Mrs Wilson. Agenda item 2, notification of substitute members. Are there any substitute members?
Councillor Borson for Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you very much and welcome to the meeting.
Councillor Newton for Councillor Simon Ells.
Thank you, Councillor Newton, and nice to see you back.
Councillor Harvey for Councillor Wilson.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you on the committee tonight, Councillor Harvey. Agenda item 3, urgent items. We have an urgent update this evening. An updated map has been circulated to the committee for agenda item 12, Maidstone Play Area Policy. It doesn't tell you where the treasure is planted, but the reason for urgency is because the map was unavailable at the time of the agenda publication. I hope you've all got a copy of that.
There's two on the map, playgrounds 68 and 79, which are in red rather than blue. Is that for any particular reason?
Could we wait till we get to the item, Councillor Button? Thank you very much. Thank you. If we go down map reading too early, we'll be... Agenda item 4, notification of visiting members. Visiting members are asked to approach the speakers' table, state their name and specify which agenda items they wish to speak on. Would you like to come forward one at a time? Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Nagy for 11 and 12. No, 12 and 13, thank you.
Thank you.
Derek Mortimer, item 12, play areas.
Thank you, Councillor Mortimer.
Councillor Burton, item 12, play areas.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton.
Councillor Round, purely observing.
Thank you very much, Councillor Round. Just clarifying, Councillor Nagy, did you say 13 as well? 12 and 13. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, members. Are there any disclosures of members or officers? Item 6, are there any disclosures of lobbying? I can say straight away that I have been lobbied on item 13. Councillor...
13.
Councillor Butler? 12 and 13. Thank you very much. Agenda item 7, minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of September 2017. I will take the minutes page by page. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. And page 5. Are those minutes agreed as the correct record, members? Thank you very much. Agenda item 8. There are no petitions this evening. Agenda item 9. Questions and answer sessions from members of the public. There are no questions from members of the public this evening, members. Agenda item 10, to consider whether any item should be taken private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. As we have no part 2 items on the agenda this evening, members, I propose that we take all items in public. Is that agreed? Thank you very much, members. Chairman's update. One piece of really good news for you. As I keep on saying in this committee, we like good news. I was privileged to attend the opening of the new Ancients Gallery in the museum, and just to qualify again, that is not retired councillors, that is ancient Egypt, Rome and Greece. The new gallery opened. It was opened by His Worship the Mayor, and we had the archaeologist Julian Richards in attendance, who came back from his previous visit to open it. And just to remind you, the star exhibit is our mummy Tarkush, and she's now housed in a case befitting her position as a lady of the Kush from ancient Egypt. So if you haven't gone, do go and have a look. It's opened for the public from the 24th of October. So all singing and dancing, and it really is good in there, and they've done a splendid job on the displays. Agenda item 11, members, committee work programme. Page 6 of your... Does any member have any comments or update to make on the work programme? As you will see, it has thinned out from what we had previously, and we're running roughly at the moment 3 items per session, but so you could say tonight was a luxury, but you can see there the items coming up for the future. Are there any comments on those, members? Thank you, members. We rush forward to item 12, one of our main items for this evening, Maidstone Play Area Policy. And Mr. Jason Taylor, the Leisure Manager, will present this item. Mr. Taylor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report is a supporting document to the Maidstone Parks and Open Spaces 10-year strategic plan, which this committee adopted on the 4th of July this year. It builds on the £1.8 million of investment on play area improvements over the last 2 years, which was based on a standard of most residents living within 12 minutes walk of a good quality play area. This report describes how Maidstone Borough Council will ensure that a quality environment continues to be provided for play and young people's social interaction in the future. The recommendations of this report support the 1.8 million of capital improvements that have already taken place over the last 2 years, which have seen 32 play areas replaced or improved in line with the 12-minute standard previously mentioned. The investment was agreed by the Cabinet Member for Communities and Leisure in May 2015. There are 120 play areas across Maidstone Borough, 73 of which are owned by MBC. The remainder are owned by other organisations, including parish councils, Kent County Council and housing associations. In 2012, a complete review of all of the play areas of the borough was carried out. This review looked not only at the standard of all play areas, but also their distribution across the borough. The review concluded that 51 out of the 69 MBC play areas needed improvement or would need improvement within 5 years to reach or maintain a green or amber standard as defined in the play area scoring matrix. It's been proposed that a borough-wide strategic play provision standard based on the majority of residents being within 12 minutes walk of a good quality play area be progressed. The identification of the strategic play areas led to the implementation of the £1.8 million player improvement capital, as mentioned. Also included in this is a £200,000 allowance to fund the grant scheme to support parish councils who own strategic play areas that form part of the network. You'll see in the report that the play areas are classified into 3 different classifications. Destination play areas, which are the large play areas at Moat Park and Cobtree. District play areas, which are the parks which typically have green flags, so Clare Park, Parkwood, Pendon Heath, South Park and Watman Park, and all of the rest are classified as local neighbourhood play areas. These are the ones that people will just walk to, and they're local play areas. A mapping exercise was carried out in 2013 to identify the distribution of the 3 different categories of play areas across the borough. This also showed areas of over and under provision. This produced a network of strategically important play areas, again, based on residents living within 12 minutes walk of a good quality play area. The map, which is enclosed and which I've updated, shows this network of strategically important play areas across the borough. The new map basically is numbered, and the numbers are the reference numbers as shown in the table, which is in 2.74. It just makes it much clearer. There are, unfortunately, a couple of mistakes in this. Firstly, South Park play areas are actually in 2 wards. They're in South Ward and they're in High Street Ward. I just referred to them as High Street Ward as the majority of them were in there. Number 79, which Councillor Bolton has identified on the map, is the harbour at Sutton Valence, which we did make a strategic play area in 2014. Unfortunately, it was a mistake on my part that I failed to put it in, so that's been included as number 79. A bit on strategically important play areas owned by parish councils. The 33 parish-owned play areas form part of the strategic network. These provide play opportunities to residents in rural areas not covered by the NBC provision. Again, I've touched on this. To support the strategically important network outside of the scope of NBC ownership, £200,000 was made available, and that will be one of the decisions to make tonight, to give a grant system to improve these areas. This grant will be available to all parish councils that have a strategically important area. They can claim up to £10,000 per parish council. It can be used for capital improvements rather than revenue, which would be replacing swing seats and general maintenance. And it would ideally be match funded by the parish or from other sources. An application process for this will be set up and managed by NBC, and this will be implemented from April 2018. That moves us on to non-strategically important play areas. Those NBC play areas considered non-strategically important, of which there are 20, will not in the future be maintained or refurbished using NBC revenue or capital resources. The equipment in these play areas will be decommissioned over a period of time as it comes to the end of its useful life. These play areas may, however, be refurbished if funding is available from other sources, such as Section 106, developer contributions, or any other sources we have. Non-strategically important play areas will be offered to parish councils, housing trusts, and any other community group to take over. And if no interested parties come forward, then the play equipment will be removed and they'll be taken back to green space when the equipment reaches the end of its useful life. Something else to be clear on, there will be no financial resources available to support the transfer of these non-strategically important play areas. In 2.11, there's future considerations. Following the completion of the player improvement programme, which will, as I've mentioned, will happen shortly, all NBC play areas should be in a good condition. However, it's important to remember that these play areas will need replacing in the future, and that financial provision will need to be made for this. Bearing in mind that this report proposes that NBC retain 42 strategic play areas, the ongoing continued cost to replace these, factoring in deterioration, will be in the region of almost 1.7 million at current prices over the next 20 years. So moving on to the options are to look at the implementation of the £200 parish grant scheme or not as an option, and to agree that any non-strategic players belonging in NBC will be retained for green space and play equipment will not be replaced when it's beyond economical repair. Just something in 4.2, it's important to remember that with the decreasing resources available, it's not possible to continue to maintain play areas which do not form part of the strategic network in the borough. It's better to have fewer good quality play areas that are accessible to as many residents as possible rather than lower quality play areas all across the borough. Any questions? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr Taylor, for your presentation. I'll call on Councillor Nagy to get the ball rolling.
Chairman, why was it with parish councils, because I haven't got a parish council, I haven't got that luxury, why was it decided to give the parish councils this sort of money when they could probably raise it themselves or put something towards it? It just seems to be, as I haven't got a parish council, it seems a hell of a lot of money to give out and spread across when we don't actually own it. I can't see the thinking behind it. When we're putting something into money we don't actually own, it's a good idea, yeah, if we was flush and we had lots of money, but it seems a lot of money to going in. I don't know where it was decided, obviously at the highest level. Is it something that can be changed, or it's already been decided and which is just going to be confirmed tonight?
Are you able to answer that?
This is about providing the same standard of play equipment across the whole of the borough to all residents, regardless of whether they're parished areas or not. So helping parish councils to improve their play areas. So the 12-minute standard, particularly in the rural areas, most of these strategically important play areas that residents will use do belong to parishes. So that's the idea of that.
Thank you. It's just that some of the parishes seem to be extremely wealthy with a lot of money, because it's been on this committee before when we've done parish councils, how much most of them keep a lot of money in the bank. So is there a criteria for the parish council? Will they have a minimum of, if they've got, say, 100,000 or something, they won't get this money, or is it purely they just get it come what may?
Thank you. Mark Green will answer your question on that one.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. Yes, just to amplify what Mr Taylor has said, it is actually a principle of the way that the council supports the parishes through the parish services scheme, that we fund the parishes to deliver services that in non-parished areas the council itself would provide. So what's proposed here is completely consistent with what happens under the parish services scheme and is an established principle.
Yeah, it just seemed to be like if the parish councils were saving the money and not spending it on something, if they knew they was going to get money from the council, obviously play area wouldn't be a priority. So I don't know what the procedure is or what's happened before, but that was just a bit surprised that when we don't actually own it, I know it's nice to have a standard, but it's not something the council own. And I've been to very lot of meetings where we don't actually own something, so we don't spend money on it. So I was just a bit surprised to see with this amount of money going out from the council to something that we don't actually own. So that was my query. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Councillor Mortimer? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, all. I'm here regarding a play area that's on the non-strategic list, which is Fountain Park in the actual South Park area. And it should be on the strategic list, in my view, and in residents' views. It's extremely busy. It's used by many grandparents, mums, and with very small children. I argued this back in 2013, 14, as Mr. Taylor might remember, and when the review was carried out, and I presented a 150 signature petition from local residents. The population around this area has grown significantly, and since the study took place, and it is increasing all the time. The play area, as I said, is in South Park, and it is a quiet, safe area for young families. It takes a mum with 2 toddlers in excess of 15 minutes plus, especially if they've got a pram and a baby, to walk from this particular area down to the actual South Park play area. And what's going to happen is, if this small area is actually closed at some stage, mums with young children are going to put them in the car and drive them round the road and park in Armstrong Road, if you know that area at all. And I can see that happening straight away, and they've said to me that's what's going to happen. I also understand this play area was funded by Section 106 money from the Laycock Gardens development, which supports 160 houses. So essentially, I'm thinking, hang on a minute, there's something else somebody's paid for, and yet the council are taking it away from the residents. We've also, since that play area was in, we've had the Golding Homes development at Enterprise Road, which is a huge high-density block, flats, around about 200 units in there. I also find the policy that's in front of you in the report that quite contradictory, and as read out just now, that it says that these play areas will continue, will not in future be maintained or refurbished, and will be decommissioned over time. I personally cannot see any developments with Section 106 money coming forward in my area, and I believe the goal is to get rid as soon as possible. I've asked around, and there's no local groups willing to take this on. It's a non-parished area, so I'm quite desperate to have this saved, and I can't find any way of doing it at the moment. The play area currently is in very good condition. It's well looked after. It costs very little money in my view, and it should be on the strategic list from a use point of view, and that's currently proved by everybody that uses it. As I said, it's in part of South Park, and can we possibly include it into the play equipment in South Park as well?
Thank you, Councillor Mortimer. Councillor Burton, thank you. I was just giving you a breathing space there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Breathing space appreciated. I'm going to actually start, quite strangely, by partly agreeing with what Councillor Nagy was saying. I think he completely got it the wrong way round. But, you know, what we're actually looking at here is an exercise where Maidstone Borough Council is passing the buck on to parish councils to pick up the strategic responsibility that we would otherwise, and where that responsibility is potentially increasing, we're certainly not increasing the parish services scheme to meet any additional needs. I'll go a stage further, and I'll almost agree with Councillor Mortimer. A lot of what he said, if you could just change the words Marden cockpits for much of what he's just said about his own patch, many of those things do apply. So I am here in particular to speak about the cockpits play area, which is on your papers for decommissioning tonight. Unashamedly here to speak about that, but also in the broader context, because I think, you know, we're looking at principles here and what is our true role as a borough district authority. So for those of you who are perhaps not familiar with the cockpits at Marden, if you could picture a 1950s, 1960s social housing development, it's a mixture of houses and lots of flats, and it's planned around a central piece of green area, so that the houses
look onto it. And in the centre of the green space where the children play, there are swings and there are climbing frames. And it was intrinsic to the design of the area. The young children can play here, and the houses around, their parents, their neighbours, they overlook them and ensure their safety. And that has been the case literally for generations. It's an intrinsic part to the community cohesion in the area. And I'm talking about one of the areas, so if I say it's not the wealthiest area in Marden, I'll put that into council speak and say it's got high levels of deprivation. Yet we're talking about removing this fundamental facility from the centre there. The decision being brought forward is about removing their swings and play equipment to actually deconstruct a fundamental part of the design of this housing area. You know, I can imagine our predecessors sat in this very chamber many years ago approving a design and actually saying, do you know what, that's really well thought out with an appropriate play facility built into it. And now, decades later, we're out to reverse that and unravel it. Locally, this park is the little park. It's where the little children play. The big kids go to the big park. The little children are there because they're the ones that aren't old enough to walk off up the road 5, 10, 15 minutes out of the supervision of their parents and their neighbours. That's the way it works. The older children can go on their own off further up the road. Bear in mind, this is an area where there's lots of flats, not big gardens. This is where they play. I went down there on Saturday just to have a look, and there is, you know, there's that group of young children. They're sat chatting, swinging, climbing, nicely playing. They're not old enough to go take themselves off up the road, so where else would they be? Sat at home, in front of the television, the Xbox, the computer games. That's the alternative. And you won't hear me banging on about the health and wellbeing agenda very often. But this is the real front line of that, where we as a council actually make a difference. You know, we want, I thought, young people outside, swinging, running, jumping, hanging off the monkey bars, stretching, exercising, and in fresh air. But we're going the other direction here. That's just a glimpse of the reality of what this particular patch is about, but I'm sure these principles apply more widely. Something I can't quite work out from the papers is there's the mention of Peveril Drive, and I remember it well. This issue's been rumbling on for years in here, and every time we get close to looking at it, we back off and park it for another 12 months, because I think in our hearts as councillors, we know this is the wrong thing to be doing. But here it is again. Peveril Drive was a good example. An exception was made. 106 money was found. And as I'm understanding it, so it was renovated, and therefore we are continuing to maintain it. I might be wrong about that, but I believe that we are. Lo and behold, I've got the 106 list out. There's, best part of £17,000 earmarked cockpits, play area improvements, £17,000 worth of capital there. I appreciate that full refurbishments can be more than that, but that's a very significant sum of money in the pot, earmarked. So what we're kind of left with is if refurbishment happens, if improvements are made, we don't really want the cost of maintaining it. But we seem to have made an exception somewhere else, and it begins to be awfully inconsistent. Back at the end of last year, there was a lot of activity about this. We needed some repairs. There were meetings involving MPs, myself, our Director of Generation and Place, and we managed to find some money to make some temporary repairs. And in the letter summarising the meeting, and he was careful to point out that there was an emerging strategy on its way. And I'll kind of sidestep for the fact that an emerging strategy, and we've already decommissioned in some places before the strategy's agreed, but of course any such strategies do not need to be absolute, as there can be local nuances, and we will always listen carefully to residents before changes are made. So, you know, the Director of Regeneration is actually saying, well, there is some scope here. Tonight, I hope we're listening to what residents have been saying to us, and we don't need to be absolute. So I've mentioned that there is 106 money. I would like to see that applied, and I would like to see MBC continue to take responsibility for the ongoing maintenance. We're going to be there anyway, cutting the grass and doing other things, so surely it's not that difficult. Councillor Mrs Ring had also hoped to be here this evening, and she did ask me to mention her concerns about this closure programme, and she also cited the example where one play area has already been decommissioned. I think it's Somerset Park, and she observes that since the swings and play equipment has been removed, that there is a significant increase in antisocial behaviour there, and that the area is neglected and is in a downward spiral. And I think that's another danger that we do need to think. It's all very well to say we'll cut the grass, but these places will actually lose their use and value and the regular attendance by good ordinary people. So we are leaving vacuums all over the place. So what I would like you to consider tonight is what the Director of Regeneration and Places has indicated might be a possibility. And instead of just saying carte blanche, there's 20 on the list, goodbye, finished, that actually we find a mechanism to individually reconsider these places. Like the one Councillor Morton mentioned, they are well-used places. They're not sitting languishing, doing nothing. Let's reconsider them on an individual basis. Where there are such mechanisms as the 106 money sitting in the pot, let's do something with it, and let's not pass the buck to others. Otherwise, in many of these areas, we'll actually be contributing nothing. So members, please don't agree on block to close all of these places, and let's have one final reconsideration on an individual basis.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. I feel I should comment at the moment, but I'll refrain at the moment until we've actually had the debate on the issue. I will just say, though, that the councillors have brought very, very cogent, I think the word is, arguments for these play areas that they represent, etc. Members, we'll now throw it open. Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. I do have grave concerns about this, and I have spoken to Mr Taylor about this before. I have a small play area in Franklin Drive in Grove Green, which I know for a fact would be impossible to walk to the one that is proposed in Grove Drive North, with a toddler and someone and a mum pushing the pram. To get there, if you were to walk up Willington Street, there is no pavement, there is traffic all the way down that road. It would mean walking with a child through an estate. I am questioning the methodology used for this. I mean, are we going to have an adult that is strolling out, at the rate of knots to get to these players? Because I can honestly say that there is no way that any child could get to the one that is from Franklin Drive to the one in Groveridge Drive North in 12 minutes. It is actually impossible. I've also got concerns because of where the play areas actually are. In Walderslade, we don't have. The Walderslade part, Maidstone part of Walderslade has no play areas whatsoever. They use the one that is in Tonbridge and Morling. The only play area we have up there that is going to be kept is the one in Lordswood. Fine. I don't think we've ever had a play area in Walderslade, so there seems to be an awful lot of money going into particular areas, and we have nothing in Walderslade. I would also question how the one in Shepherd's Gate Drive is going to be closed, because it's exactly the same as Councillor Burton has said. This is for toddlers. If they were to walk to Pennington Heath, this is for much bigger children. Little ones get intimidated. The one that I have in Shepherd's Gate Drive is exactly the same as Councillor Burton said. Different sort of area, but exactly the same. And I've walked past there at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's full of toddlers with grandparents, exactly the same as Councillor Burton has described. So my question is, first of all, can you please tell me the methodology that was used to actually come to the conclusion that a child can walk 12 minutes to get to the nearest player in Grove Green, please?
Mr Taylor, can you respond?
Sorry, we spent a lot of time on this, and the 12-minute walk was, there is a standard 12-minute walking pace. So it wasn't particularly for children, it wasn't particularly for sprinters, it was just an average pace, and the walking pace is an average pace. So what we did, we took all the maps of the borough that we have on AO sheets, and we put this walking pace around them. We made an allowance for rivers, motorways, any major roads, and all of that was included. So when this network was worked out, that's what was done.
Mr Chairman, please. So you actually did this by looking at a map. Did anybody actually walk it with a child? That's what I want to know.
They weren't all walked with the child, but they were all walked. They were all visited. They all looked at this. And don't forget as well, it's a maximum of 12 minutes walk. So most of those people will live considerably closer. You know, it's not all these people will live in 12 minutes walk. Most people will live considerably closer to the play areas.
I've got Councillor Belton next. Sorry.
I think part of the problem comes by that we're looking at this and what is the whole point of our play areas? Do we want a smaller number of bigger play areas, or do we want lots of local ones to service the needs of individual residents? And I argue it's the latter, really, which we want, because the geography of each different ward and each different parish and each different community means that the needs are different. And I don't think putting an arbitrary 12-minute walking time on there is particularly helpful, because otherwise you get what we've got on the papers in front of you tonight, which is that 20 play areas which have been which have been designated as not being strategically important when you could. And I've just gone through and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that I know of very well, including one in Rosehome in Fant, which I'd argue is going to be a strategically important one, because while it might be less than 12 minutes to walk to Cornwallis Park, you do have to cross the A26 Tunbridge Road, which is a pretty busy road as well. And if you live in Prospect Place or if you live in Charles Street, you don't really want to be doing that when you've got Rosehome on your doorstep. And part of the problem we've got in that part of Fant is getting investments into the area, and this is taking investment out of the area as well, in one of the most deprived parts of the whole borough as well. So I've got a real problem with this, and I'd echo everything that Councillor Burton said about the approach going forward. But we're going to have to look at these individually, to be honest. We're going to have to involve ward councillors in them as well, because I think it's fair to say that ward councillors, and there's 3 in my ward here, would have different views about where the investment's needed, what, as Councillor Hinder says, what age groups they service as well, and how we can work best within the parameters we've got. So I've got a real problem with just sort of like ticking off, these 20 can go and away we go. So I think we've got the strategy wrong, to be totally honest with you. And that's why we're in this position here today, Mr Chairman. So I can't support the recommendations that are on the pages, I'm afraid. And bringing back Councillor Nagy and lastly Councillor Burton raised the point I was going to make as well about sort of the difference between sort of the parished areas and the town areas here. And if I go and speak to the people I represent in Fant Ward, something that I'm getting more and more from this council is that, oh, it's only interested in the rural areas, all this money goes towards the parishes, we get absolutely nothing in the town. And by agreeing the first part, I think it's the first part of the recommendation, it will be very hard for me to counter that when I'm speaking to the people who elected me.
Thank you very much. Did you want to respond to that particular, on some of the points made? I think councillors obviously have been consulted, for instance.
Yes. Firstly, regarding the money given to the parishes, that we're proposing in this grant scheme, don't forget there was 1.6 million spent on Maidstone Borough Council play areas over the last 2 years, so we're just coming to the end of that. So certainly the strategically important play areas in that network have been improved, and the £200,000 is a contribution towards the parishes. The other thing I think it's worth touching on is why we looked at this in the first place, because the resources weren't available. So if we were to keep the 20 non-strategic play areas, most of which are not in particularly good condition, basing on the work we've just done, the capital works we've just done, that will cost in the region of £800,000 to keep all of those and get them to a good condition. Plus the revenue cost of maintaining them. Plus, as I've mentioned in this report, they're going to need replacing in certainly within 20 years. So, that's the reason we've looked at this strategic network and tried to prioritise play area and trying to have a standard across the whole borough. It's not to close play areas, that's by no means the desire, but it's trying to get a network of play areas that we can actually afford to maintain both now and going forward, and providing good quality play rather than just play.
Do you want to come back on that?
I mean, one of the fundamental purposes of taxation and the reason that we tax our residents is to provide services. And this is one of the most noticeable things this council can do to demonstrate to residents that they are not delivering for the taxes that they pay. And that's a fundamental problem. It's an ideological point, ultimately, that I've got with this, which is that I believe this council has a few things. It's got to clean the streets, it's got to pick up the bins, and it's got to provide some leisure activities to residents. And I think you see, I don't sit on this committee, this is my first time sitting on this committee in a proper meeting, and I'd argue that play areas trumps almost any other cultural aspect of this town as to what most people use. And that's why I think we're on such a slippery slope if we start even, I know it's only 20, I know it's not, when you look at the map of the borough, it's not very much, but these are 20 that should fundamentally change people's lives and livelihoods, and in very, very specific pockets of the borough. And I feel uncomfortable as an elected representative. I mean, tax is money taken by the state by force. Ultimately, you don't get a choice as to whether you pay tax or not, and we've got a responsibility in order to ensure that money is spent wisely. And I think it's a much harder case for me to make as an elected councillor to justify that to residents in the whole grand scheme of what this council does. So I accept what Mr. Taylor's saying. It's just not something that I can take, if I'm honest, as an elected representative.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. I will just say that this is the first time you've been to this committee, and obviously I do assure you that we take every subject we deal with as seriously as anything, because obviously it's what we do. And obviously play areas is very important to us. This is why we're having this debate tonight. So please be assured that it is a serious subject. Thank you. Port.
Just going back to the parish councils, the residents in the parish pay a precept. So not only do they pay their Maidstone council tax, they pay a precept on top. And therefore, actually, they're double paying. They're the ones that are losing out. The other thing is, when visits were made to the various play sites, the 20, I assume that usage was looked at.
Yes, usage was looked at, and as it says in the report, we looked at the usage levels, the actual quality of the play area at the time. So those were taken into account. And a decision had to be made on most of those, that we would choose one or other play area within that 12 minutes walking distance. So, and that was consulted with at the time.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Newton next.
Thank you very much. Having campaigned to get improvements in the Downswood area, I feel very strongly about certain of these. You could remove item 5 on this list without any problems. That's Raindon Grove. It's not used. It's not fit for purpose. But I totally agree with what Councillor Borton has said here, and I think personally there needs to be a resident survey. And if you say there's been a usage, I'd like to see the results of the usage. Who have you talked to? We need a resident survey of these areas to ascertain whether they are used, whether they're wanted. That's the best way forward, which is what happened in Downswood in respect of the deletion of Raindon Grove. It's not required. So, you know, I'm very uncomfortable with the removal of all these. I think they need to be looked at again, and all members of this committee, although I'm only a substitute, need to have that information before any decision is taken to remove these. And I'd like to put that forward as a motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is your motion seconded? Councillor Hinder. Okay, members, can we vote on that particular motion? Did you have any words there for that?
Not sketched out at the moment, but I'm certain I can come up with something before the end of this meeting. We need to know more about what's gone on in the past on here, and what the usage is in detail.
Okay, can you just bring in Lord Hugg for a moment? Thank you.
This work was done quite some time ago, as Jason set out in his report, when we were actually in cabinet structure, and we had overview and scrutiny. We had lots of members involved in the process at the time. This is a difficult decision. Nobody would want to close play areas if we could help it, but it is being driven by budget restrictions. And my concern is that if we don't make some decision about how we will select the play areas that are closed, we're going to be in a position where we just, each time one comes forward, a good case will probably be made by the residents. There'll probably be occasions where, as Councillor Newton just pointed out, there's one that he knows isn't used. But my concern is that we haven't got any additional budget. We spent the 1.8 million on the strategically important play areas. That was agreed by the Cabinet member at the time. And we're now in a position where that capital investment has been made. There isn't an ongoing capital budget to do further improvements. And as Jason has pointed out in his report, as Mr Taylor's pointed out, we'll need in the region of £100,000 a year after the next 4 years to go into the pot to start replacing the equipment that is in the strategically important play areas. So I'm just mindful to just remind members that the decision here is unfortunately, you know, a very strongly budget-based decision.
Councillor, you wanted to come back?
Yes, I mean, okay, the overview and scrutiny committees were 5 years ago at least. Now, this town has grown since that time by thousands of houses. And there must be money from Section 107 contributions to actually look at this again. And I don't accept that you can pass something that's 5 years old on such an important as children's play areas. I'm sorry, but I can't. I couldn't support that.
Thank you very much. Can I just say from the Chair, just to remind members that the policy we have before us is a new one, and obviously it is an overarching policy. Without prejudging anything, I'm sure going forward that safety nets will be put in place, and these areas you're discussing tonight will be looked at. So it's not the end of the road, and I wouldn't want to go back and start a survey all over again. To be costing money, etc., etc. I do appreciate that play areas are very important for all councillors and in the borough. We're not talking about slaughter here. We're talking about a new policy. So just bear that in mind. I don't really want to put the clock back and we start doing another survey. But let's press on with the people. I've got Councillor Hastie next.
Thank you. My questions are very similar to other people's. It was the assessment of the usage of the parks that was done 5 years ago. We've already started increasing the housing across the borough, and we've got several thousand more houses we're going to need to put in. And if we're looking forward, we can't just be using old data. And I support Councillor Newton that we do need to have, surveyed properly. And we may have done it in the past, but we're going into a new era, and there are more children and more houses. And I'm not happy about sitting there closing parks that, children need to go to. So.
Thank you very much. Councillor Butler, I think you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. Was any of the money that was spent in the 1.8 million, was that from Section 106 agreements?
No, that was all capital. Section 106 we do use for improving play areas as and when we've got them available, and we would continue to do so on strategic and non-strategic play areas. But no, the 1.8 or 1.6 million that we spent, none of that was 106. It was all capital from the council.
Councillor Lewins.
Thank you. Does this take into account the forecast of new developments as well?
Yes, they were looked at as part of the green space, the open spaces strategy. All of that information was added in for the whole term of the local plan.
Thank you.
Councillor, oh, sorry, you want to come back?
Sorry, just a separate question. If they have been decommissioned, which is a really last resort, because after hearing what people have said, it's quite sad for residents not being able to go anywhere or to have a bit of a hike to get there. So I sympathise with what people are saying. If they do become, if they're offered, so that if we do have to decommission them, they would be offered to the local housing association. I think Derek mentioned, or one of the other councillors mentioned, Golding Homes. I think that was Councillor Mortimer who mentioned that. And would that automatically go to Goldings? Would you contact them and ask them if they were able to take this on?
Any of the non-strategic players would be advertised, and anyone who came to us, any community group that came to us and that we were happy could look after them, yes, they'd be transferred to them. And as it says in the report, we would help them, set them up, explain to them what needs doing. Potentially we could do training and things like that. What we can't do is put money into these because we haven't got the money to put into them.
So you would be able to advise them and help them in ways to set something up so that they wouldn't feel isolated and on their own?
Yes. Yep, any community groups.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I don't doubt that there hasn't been work gone in behind this and that the data is there. But picking up on some of the other points, I don't think we can be seen to make a fair decision unless we see that data. It looks like we've just got a list and we've just axed through it. I mean, section 2.3 of the report talks about parks where there's a deficit and where there's an over-provision for them. Nowhere in this report does it say which ones those are. It also mentions about age groups. We can't see which age group each of these parks are for. By axing the ones on this list here, are we inadvertently axing loads of parks for one particular age group? And then having the impacts that Councillor Burton referred to, where we're just saying to one age group, you don't deserve to go outside, go back indoors. Where are the usage stats for it? How can we see, even if it is out-of-date data from 2011, what the usage figures were, to give us some comparison? I mean, we need something to show on this list here that what we're doing is fair and there is some criteria behind it. Otherwise, we're just literally picking them out of a hat.
Councillor Inge, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I'm very, very concerned that it's the young people, it's the youngsters, the tiny ones, the toddlers, that are being penalised on this. And I can see the bigger, all these play areas that are going to have a lot of equipment for all age groups. The little ones are going to be pushed out, and that is my concern. So I support that, exactly what you're saying. Mr Taylor, can I ask you, if the parish council were to take over the running of the little one that's in Franklin Drive, which has probably got 2 or 3 swings and a little roundabout and some little thing to sit on, which can't possibly cost a huge amount of money. There's big expanse of grass there. There's a tree is all overgrown. The tree hasn't been cut back for quite some time. The equipment, because of the birds that get on this tree, the children can't hardly use this equipment because the birds have messed up on it so much. So would it be possible for you to give me a rough idea of how much it would cost if the parish council, Boxley Parish Council, were to take over the running of the little area in Franklin Drive, please?
Yes, that's exactly the type of thing that we'd be able to help with on any of the play areas. So, yes, we would be able to do that.
Is it possible if you could send that to me first, please? Yeah, if you could let me have that first, please. Thank you.
Councillor Newton, you have a motion on the table. Do you have wording at all now?
Yeah, I think so. The motion is that the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee recommends that the decision to decommission NSIPA's play areas prior to them being removed, that each play area is reviewed and evaluated on an individual basis.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Hinder. Members will put that to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? Abstentions?
Needs to be reviewed now based on today's data.
Just going to go back to one on your papers, members. The report makes the following recommendations to this committee. We've got the implementation of the 200,000 parish play area scheme.
Right, how does what we've just voted on affect that recommendation then, Mr Chairman? Because I think that's quite important, certainly for me.
That's a jolly good question. Thank you very much.
There's nothing to stop us still going ahead with the parish council grant scheme. The only problem is that is the only budget we've got available. So my concern that I made earlier, if we bring back each of the 20 play areas at the time when they're due to be commissioned, and committee doesn't want to decommission them, where will the budget come from in order not to do that? So I think they are linked in terms of that is the only budget that we have that isn't already committed.
Councillor Balfour.
In that case, Mr Chairman, can I suggest then that we sort of defer that recommendation or whatever until we can sort of sort out the previous recommendation that we made and do it all again once we've had those usage figures? It just seems peculiar to make that decision now, bearing in mind the impact that Mrs Hudds just said it will have on the recommendation we just voted on.
I'll just come back on that. I'm just trying to put this. Please feel free to chip in, Mr Green or Mr Taylor. The 20 non-strategic play areas are not all going to come up at the same time. They're going to come up as and when they reach the end of their useful life. So that could be over a period of 5 years, 5 to 10 years. So without the parish council grant scheme being in place, it means we're going to jeopardise all the strategic play areas that are in the parish areas that the parish councils might otherwise take over and potentially use some of their own funding to match any grant we would give them to improve those play areas and keep them. So.
I might need to take a legal advice on this. If we go for number 1, do we also need to do number 2? No? Sorry, members, just having a deliberation to see where we're going on this. Thank you. Councillor Newton, Dawn would like to just clarify something with you.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify? A member's asking for a further report to come back on the usage for all the play areas, or are you just asking for each of the 20 play areas that are on the decommissioning list at the moment to come back at the time when the decision needs to be made so that the committee can then consider it and at the same time consider the budget implications that might be involved in any decision that is made at that time?
Can I come back to you on this motion? And it says the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee recommends that the decision to decommission NSIPAs prior to closure and that each play area is evaluated, because it's referring to NSIPAs, on an individual basis based upon usage and the source of possible Section 106 funding. And that's how it's, I think I probably answered your question there.
Councillor Newton's one replaces 2.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's doable.
I don't entirely agree with that. I think we need to see data for all the parks. If we just know the ones that are going, we can't guarantee that the ones that are going have got the right data behind them. I think we need to see everything in context. We can't then just go through the ones that we've already said we don't want. We need to see them all to make sure that the ones that are going are fair.
Councillor Newton.
There is 2 parts of the recommendation. Part 1 is to agree the implementation of the £200,000 parish play area grant scheme and over a 2-year period, which will support the council in improving strategically important play areas. It's section part 2 that we need. That's what that motion refers to.
Exactly. We can vote on what part 1, and then part 2 is your motion. Thank you. Councillor Bunn.
Could we perhaps alter part 1 so that the £200,000 is not necessarily available over a 2-year period, but over the next 5 to 10 years, whenever it becomes available, and is available to any parish or community group who may want to take over one of the non-strategically important play areas?
I think that it will be a first-come, first-served basis, but they will be assessed and consideration will be taken into account whether match funding is going to be available from the parish. I think the money will go within 2 years. You could say we want to do it over 5, but I don't think there'll be anything left after 2.
From the Chair, I think, 2 years in Council at the moment, we don't know the finances in 2 years' time. I think we have to stick with the this in this 2-year period, because we're talking now, not 10 years down the line.
I agree that it will probably go on a first-come, first-served basis, and that may provide a motivation to parishes or community groups who wish to take over a play area to get their act in gear, to know that the moment the council has the funding available, and that might bring forward some improvements, and that's got to be a good thing. The issue is, what happens if you have a parished area where it's not the parish that wants to take over, but let's say the local residents association? I mean, Downswood, there's a parish council and a community centre group, isn't there? Yeah, I mean, what's happens if it's what happens if the DCA, or whoever it is, wanted to take over, instead of just the parish council in the parished area? That's why I suggest maybe broadening that first line of that recommendation out as well. And also then you cover non-parished areas too.
The intention of Part 1 is to provide money to parish councils, so we don't have a mechanism for providing the money other than to parish councils for the work. I think, as we've said already, that this grant scheme provides a way of supporting the strategic play areas, and it is likely to be used quite quickly. We know that parishes are interested in coming forward to do the work in the play areas in their parishes. So I don't think that there's an alternative option available.
Thank you, members. I don't want to go around the houses all night long, and we don't want to open the can of worms of play areas going back, Sorry. I'm going to guillotine this, and I'm going to stick to number 1 as it stands at this moment in time. And going forward, we could, as a committee, look at it in the future. But I think tonight we need to agree Part 1, and we've got Councillor Newton's motion as well, and that will complete our business on that particular programme. Unless there are any objections, I'm going to go for the vote on 1. Yeah, it's separate, yes. Do I have a seconder for Part 1? Councillor Ford, sorry. I'll just read out number 1 again, just so we're all clear. To agree to implementation of the £200,000 parish play areas grant scheme over a 2-year period, which will support the parish councils in improving strategically important play areas that they own. Can we go to the vote on that, members? All those in favour? Seven in favour. Those against? Any abstentions? We've already voted on Councillor Newton's motion, so that's clear. Thank you very much, members, on that. Thank you, members. We will press on with agenda item 13. Which is disposal of land adjacent to Gallagher Stadium. Mr. Mark Green, Director of Finance and Business Improvement, will present this item to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This report sets out a proposal to dispose of a strip of land owned by the council alongside Maidstone United Stadium. The background is that the club tell us that they'd like to create a private access way along this strip of land which would allow spectators to access the North Stand. And this needs a bit of further explanation, I think. If you look at the plan on page 25 of your agenda, the North Stand is the rectangle at the top of the stadium. Actually, it's a bit bigger in real life now. And the North Stand currently has two entrances. On the right, as you look at the plan, there are some turnstiles which give access to the eastern side of the stand, which is where away supporters go. On the left of the North Stand, access is along the pitch, along the west side of the pitch, and down out to the bottom, the south end of the stadium. Now, the issue from the club's point of view is that they would like to develop the stadium, and I think that's something that everybody would endorse. Obviously, the club is growing, and it's a source of pride for the town. And to do that, they want to put up terracing on the east side of the stadium, the left side as you look at the plan. The problem with that, as things stand at the moment, is that that side of the stadium, which isn't developed at all at the moment, is what's being used by spectators exiting the North Stand. They just walk along that side of the pitch. So the proposal is that the strip of land that we own, which is already actually an informal path outside the fence of the stadium, the proposal is that the football club takes that over and turns it into a private access way which would give access to the North Stand in the stadium. So that's the proposal that the club has brought to us. Members who were here when you met in April will remember that the proposal actually came to the committee then, and members were supportive of the football club, but there were concerns expressed about the council losing control over how the land would be used in the longer term, specifically the land that the club wanted to use. And it was proposed at that time that the football club be given a licence over the land to use it as they wished. Unfortunately, the idea of a licence didn't meet the club's requirements, because what the club want to do, understandably, is to have exclusive use of this strip of land and fence it in. So it is a dedicated path to give access to the North Stand. So it is actually appropriate for the council to dispose of this strip of land to provide the path that the football club wants. And the first recommendation that you're asked to agree is that you declare this strip of land surplus to requirements so that it may be disposed of. So that's recommendation 1 that's in front of you on page 19. And if you agree this, we would place a public notice in accordance with Section 123 of the Local Government Act, and that advertises the fact that we're content to declare the land surplus requirements for 2 weeks. And the matter would only have to come back to committee if there were any objections to the decision to declare the land surplus to requirements. So those are first couple of recommendations. But we're also asking you to confirm the way in which the council disposes of the land. And the proposal in recommendation 3 is that you agree that the land should be disposed, and we should actually add on a leasehold basis, to be crystal clear, to the Maidstone United Football Club for a term of 99 years as a peppercorn rent. And this is because it's the council's policy to dispose of land on a leasehold basis if there's a strategic benefit in retaining the freehold title. And we've included the policy as Appendix 2. And the reason that this is the council's policy is that councils across the country, including Maidstone, have over the years disposed of freeholds at strategic locations like this and have subsequently regretted the decision, because once you dispose of the freehold, you've lost really any capacity to influence the future use of the land. Once the freehold's disposed of, the land's lost forever. And it's for that reason that the policy is worded as it is, and the policy was approved recently by Policy and Resources Committee. And I think it's clear in this case that there is a strategic benefit for the council in retaining the freehold. The land's near the centre of the town. It forms part of a bigger strip of land between the stadium and the river and footpath, which is a green barrier, hedges, trees, bushes, trees, which mean that actually walking along the river, you wouldn't necessarily know that you're so close to the town. So it is of strategic value to the council. Now, the report acknowledges that the football club themselves have expressed a preference for a freehold disposal, and the reasons that they give for this are that they don't want to have any restrictions on use of the land, they think a leasehold creates additional complexity, and they say, quite rightly, that the football club makes a big contribution to the life of the town. But we don't think that those concerns that the football club has are well-founded. I mean, going back to the reasons why the club tell us they want to acquire the land to create an access way to the North Stadium, there's actually no difference in practical terms between a leasehold and a freehold. They will get the land to use as a path, whatever route we take. But there is a difference from the council's point of view between a leasehold and a freehold, in that if we dispose of the freehold, we would lose the ability to influence the future of the site, and that would be detrimental to the council's interests. So the officer recommendation here is that you adhere to the current policy and dispose on a leasehold basis, which is what is set out in recommendation 3. And recommendation 4 gives authority to implement that disposal decision. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. Sorry. Questions, members? Oh, sorry, Councillor Nagy, please.
There we go. Well, the history of this, as for members that have members that don't know what's been going on in the past, a letter was sent to the Maidstone United last September from one of the officers confirming that the best option for Maidstone Borough Council was for this land to be sold to Maidstone Borough Council. So that's how long this has been going on. That was, I don't know, everyone knows that case. That's what we discussed at the last meeting. So there is a bit of a non-consistency here, or inconsistency. And then at the last meeting, which was a bit chaotic, a lease came up, and I asked the question, was the club happy with this? And no one knew. So as this club is contributing to the success of Maidstone, and the owners have spent at least £5 million doing this, and because they are such a successful club, This, if you go back to the plan, they need that bit of tarmac there. With, if you see those 2 dots, that's where the teams actually have the dugout. They need that access. They need this extra access so they can use that bit of land because they are such a successful club. And at the moment, they're doing quite well in the league, and the success goes on. Now, obviously, we've had... I definitely agree it should be declared surplus. I'm not querying that at all. It is surplus to requirements because it's mainly used by drug people or them sort of people, and it has a lot of antisocial behaviour. So this would sort this problem out, and Maidstone United would maintain that bit of land, and it would be maintained more than neglected like it is at the moment. And this is why they need this bit of land there. And we got over this before at previous meetings. In the last year at this meetings, we had Councillor Perry at Staplehurst, though they wanted a piece of land, and we got over this concern that if that land ever comes up for sale, for any reason, the land reverts back to Maidstone Borough Council. So I'm a bit surprised to hear Mr Green to say tonight that our policy is not to do that, but to just lease it. So I'm very concerned that we have an inconsistency there. A meeting that I attended earlier in the year, we had a situation where we could let the land be freehold to a parish council, and they could have it. And the condition was, as we discussed on the night to the members that were here, that if that land ever came up for sale, or is anything to do, it would revert back to Maidstone Borough Council. So I think we've got a great inconsistency here, and I would like members to agree tonight that it is the surplus, but if Maidstone United have it as freehold, which I cannot see any reason, because this land's about 4 foot wide, I think, if I'm correct. It's not the biggest bit of land, and it doesn't mean much to the council at the moment, but it means a lot to the success of this club. So if they had it freehold, they could have a condition on which we've already done this year. So I don't know what policies we're looking at here, but we've done a condition for other organisations where they can have the land freehold, and if in the future it ever comes up for sale, it has to come back to Maidstone Borough Council. Now, I've said this before. This came back with the Ophthalmic Hospital that was built hundreds of years ago. When that came up for development, the tennis courts opposite reverted back to Maidstone Borough Council. This seems the most logical thing. So in hundreds of years' time, people will be saying, oh, the council's made the right decision at the time because we got that land back. And if you know now, Golding Homes and Cutbush have got a development on that land. Now, I'm not saying this land's as big as that, but this land is very important to the club. And I think as this probably is our best tourist attraction and putting us on the map, and if they have a good run in the FA Cup like they did a few years ago, it puts Maidstone on the map. So I'm very surprised that as this has been going on over a year, it's taken this long. And what I can't understand about it is that we do have Maidstone Borough Council being inconsistent, I'm afraid, at the moment, and I need clarification on that. But tonight I'm hoping that members will vote for it to be declared surplus and that it can be sold freehold to the Maidstone United. I don't even know if that's taken place. But obviously, when I've heard tonight, obviously they've not changed their minds. They would still like to see it freehold. And I think the condition on it, that if ever this... I think that people are worried, or certain people are worried, that there'll be development on this land at some stage. Now, if that is the worry, then that condition that we've put onto other projects, that the land will come back to Maidstone Borough Council. And that sorts out any problems that we've had in the past. And I think I'd like that if members could bear that in mind tonight, that if Maidstone United, who are spending millions of pounds in Maidstone, really would like to buy it freehold, and we're only talking about a 4-foot length here, and you can see how important it is to them to have access, because on that side of the ground at the moment, there's no access out of the ground. They have to come down to either side. And it's very important to the club, and I think that it would be fantastic for the councillors tonight to decide that. And that's what I'd like to see proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nagy. Thank you very much for that. Councillor Bolton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And knowing that I was coming tonight, I went to well, I didn't go to the football match just because I was coming tonight on Saturday, but while I was at the football match on Saturday, I decided to go and have a look at this particular bit of land. And so people like me who spend far too much time at football grounds across the country and get to see some of the geography associated with them, it does seem peculiar, if you were coming in from the outside, that this bit of land has not been, this process basically hasn't already happened. And I'm not familiar, I wasn't here at the April meeting, so I'm not familiar with what the discussions were then or where this idea of a licence came up, because on the face of it, that seems a peculiar suggestion, to be honest, and there's no, and the fact that the club said no seems perfectly reasonable. So that as well. But we've got a great opportunity here as a council to support the biggest sports team in our borough. And as you know, Mr Chairman, I've been banging on for a while now about how we need to do more to support sport in the borough, and particularly football, because this council doesn't do very much of it at the moment. So we've got a great opportunity to do this here. So I very much support recommendation 1 in this because it's not got sort of it's just the right thing to do, to be honest. But Councillor Nagy makes a very good point, I think, with can we dispose of this on a freehold basis with that condition? That's the absolute nub of the question as to whether it's freehold or leasehold in my eyes, to be honest, because ultimately, if there's going to be a strategic benefit, as the policy says, then basically we're thinking, what's going to be the use of this land post-Maidstone United, post-football ground being there? And if you look at Maidstone United's attendances at the moment, and you think where the club could be if it does well on the pitch in the next few years, it could go up a division or 2, in which case it's going to have to invest in a new pitch, it's going to have to invest in an all-seater stadium potentially, it's going to have to make all these investments, and it's going to and one of the decisions that the club's going to have to make is, are we able to do so on this site? And dare it be for me to bring up Maidstone United and sites of football stadiums again, considering the history this council's had with that over time. But that will become a serious consideration, considering the constraints that you have on this particular bit of land on all sides already, particularly with obviously the river and associated car parking and so on and so forth. So that's a question that we've got to ask ourselves as to whether it fits the criteria. So from my point of view, I'd support Councillor Nagy's suggestion that it should be freehold with a condition that if it's ever sold, we then sort of take a share of the profits, or however it works. I don't know, and I'd be interested to hear from Mr Green on that. But we've got a great opportunity here to support Maidstone United and the club, and I think really we should be doing this, Mr Chairman.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's no dispute that we are really supporting our local football club. We are very lucky to have such quality, and we have it in the town centre, which is good, and it's very good for the economy. However, disposing of the land is not an easy option here. I'll ask Mr Green if we come back on just some of those options that you were talking about.
We're proposing a long leasehold disposal, 99 years, which is actually very close in practice to a freehold disposal, and it's not clear really why the club is so insistent on having the freehold. On the issue about whether you could build clauses into the freehold that give us some kind of veto or sanction, I mean, actually, it's very difficult to enforce covenants like that, and why would you go down that route and have those kind of complications? It's a bit unclear why you'd want to do that as opposed to have the lease. I mean, it is possible, if we were to go against our own policy and to dispose on a freehold basis, we could ask for some sort of overage provision whereby we would get a share of any gain on the land, but it's only a very small bit of land, so there wouldn't be much gain if the club were subsequently to sell the site. We are supporting the club by agreeing that the leasehold disposal. I'm not sure that they gain any more by it being freehold, but we suffer detriment because we lose any ability to influence the future of the site.
Councillor Hinder next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to have to admit, I don't particularly like football. I can't bear it when my husband watches football. However, I do realise this is a real asset to Maidstone. I'm just confused as to what difference this is going to make. Either they buy it or they lease it. If there's no difference, then surely I'm quite happy to support what we're saying. I can't see why they're insisting that they buy it if the usage is going to be the same. So I really, and I quite understand Councillor Nagy is for them, but I really can't understand this. I mean, I'm quite happy to go along with the recommendation. Thank you.
You seconded Councillor Hinders, Councillor Harvey. As is. Thank you very much. Members, that's been proposed, so I will go. I'll take them one at a time, though, and we'll vote on each one. Sorry, do you want to come back before we...
I would quite like to come back on what Mr Green said about the freehold, to be honest. And the reason that I push this is because the usage could change over time. You could put a terrace stand there, you could put an all-seated stand there, you could actually put a mixed stand there if you wanted to. I know it's a very, very small bit of land, but you could have, if you're going to access the north, as you might, if you come in from the south end of the stadium to get to the north stand, you currently have to walk up the west. It might be at a certain point. I mean, there's so much you can do within football grounds in order to change access points that we may as well give Maidstone United that flexibility to do so, and that's why I'd argue for a freehold here. That's the whole argument. Otherwise, we'll end up tangling ourselves up in knots about the every single time there is something new that's proposed by Maidstone Uniteders to do on the west side of the stadium. They could, for example, move the pitch slightly west or move the pitch slightly east, or the pitch gets bigger or the pitch gets smaller as ground regulations change in accordance with the laws of the game. That's something that's possible as well. I mean, there really is so much we can do, and that's why I think it's going to be easier for the council to get rid of it on a freehold basis rather than a leasehold basis. So while I accept there's actually not much sort of difference on paper, I think in terms of what we could actually, looking ahead into the future, what could happen on that site going forward, I think if we're going to support the football club as best as we want to, as Maidstone Borough Council, I think we're best off sending it on a freehold basis, but then retaining the sort of the clawback as and when needed, so that we get sort of our financial gain when necessary. That's just what I think, really.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Borton. The leasehold agreement would be drawn up in such a way that if the club wanted to make a material change to the way in which they were using the land, then we could change the terms of the lease. It wouldn't be a big issue. Obviously, if they wanted to do anything major on the site, they would have to get planning permission anyway, but we could accommodate changes to use within the terms of the lease.
I'm going to go back to the vote if on each part, if we're content with that. I think we could talk this round a bit more, but I think from the chair, leasehold is probably gives us a little more control than we would have otherwise, and that doesn't mean to say we are not supporting the club as much as we can. But I think we don't know. It's like a crystal ball, you know, how well things are going to pan out, but I think we have to retain some control and to make sure going forward that we give the taxpayers their, you know, due. Councillor Butler.
Will the football club accept the leasehold?
We've been in discussion with the football club, and they understand that the leasehold is our policy. So I think they would reluctantly accept that that's the route that we would take.
Okay, members, I'm going to take these one by one, put it to the vote. I'll read each one out. Number one, that the committee agrees to declare the open space adjacent to the Gallagher Stadium, as outlined in red on the attached planned Appendix 1, as surplus to operational requirements. 4. That's unanimous, members. Number 2, that the committee agrees to authorise the placing of a public notice pursuant of section 123 of the Local Government Act 1972, advertising the proposed disposal of the land. You vote that, members? Thank you. That was unanimous. Number 3, that the committee agrees that the land should be disposed on a leasehold basis to the football club for a term of 99 years at a peppercorn rent. Vote on that, please, members. You just double. Those against? Any abstentions? One abstention. Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm left-handed as well. I should be looking your way. So, 2 abstentions. Thank you. Number 4, that the Director of Finance and Business Improvement uses delegated powers to conclude the lease negotiations. All in favour? And that concludes the business for this evening. I'd like to thank you all very much for your attendance and your input on these subjects. Thank you very much.